Welcome everyone to this really exciting live conversation on our new book entitled In the Image of Our Heavenly Parents, A Couple's Guide to Creating a More Divine Marriage. This is really exciting for many reasons, but first and foremost, this is the first time all 7 of us collaborators have actually been together live. We're not physically together, but even on the same screen. Someone just mentioned we created this all over email and all over the phone, and never have we been in person. So it's just really beautiful to see all your faces and be here together. Really grateful to Jennifer Finlayson-Fife and her assistant Christy, who made this gathering possible. So grateful that they've made this special um, time possible, and we're grateful for all of you who've joined us. It's a real gift that you'd share an hour of your afternoon with us. So thank you, everybody. And first of all, we wanted just to start off this conversation by being very clear about something. McArhur and I are not experts in marriage. Both of our husbands will attest to that fact. They are good people and they love us anyway, and we're striving in our marriages. But McArhur and I both believe deeply in the power and the potential of marriage. And over the last decade in writing books together, we've really strived to become experts in using our Latter-day Saint theology of heavenly parents to bless lives. And so what we set out to do is we wanted to take these beautiful truths from the restored gospel about heavenly parents, and we wanted to see if we could take those truths to inspire couples to live in the image of our heavenly parents and to create more divine marriages. Because we're not experts, we needed to call them in. And we are so fortunate in our faith to have so many extraordinary marriage and family therapists. But we I'd like to call them luminaries because they are literally lighting the way for all of us to walk forward in creating better marriages and healthier marriages. About over a decade ago, I moved to the North Shore of Chicago and was just phenomenally lucky and forever grateful that I moved into a ward with Jennifer Finlayson-Fife. And going to church anywhere in the world can be great. But when you show up to church in Chicago and you get to spend Sunday school in a marriage and family therapy class with Jennifer Finlayson-Fife, church is really good. And so the experience of learning about marriage and the gospel with her was life-changing. And so when we started doing the ideas of doing this book, we reached out to Jennifer and asked her if she was in, and she was. So grateful. And then we heard that Julie Hanks had actually done a whole dissertation on learning about partnership marriages. And she had developed a framework on the principles of healthy partnerships. And Julie was so gracious to share this framework with us as we were starting to launch and create this book. So thank you, Julie, for that. And then because we're talking about heavenly parents and partnership, of course, we wanted to have some female perspectives from therapists and male perspectives of therapists. So through Jennifer and Julie, we were introduced to Geoff and Jody Steurer and Ty Mansfield. And we're so fortunate that they were willing to share their expertise with us as well. So the seven of us together, we created this guidebook. We developed this 12 principles based on Julie's research on principles for creating more divine marriages and strong partnerships. And we are thrilled to share these with you in this book and hope that by following them, we can all better live in the image of our heavenly parents. I'm going to turn the time over to McArhur, and she's going to take a deeper dive into the doctrinal foundation of our guidebook.
I would say deep, brief dive. So one of my personal favorite things about our gospel is that we are not just thinkers, because sometimes I can get in my head too much. And what we really believe in is applying truth to our lives. Truth blesses lives. So if we just talk about paying our tithing, we're not going to get any of the blessings that come when we actually exercise that principle. So if we talk about heavenly parents, but we don't apply it to our lives, we're missing out on these blessings. So in the Gospel Topics essay of Mother in Heaven, Elder Oaks says, our theology begins with heavenly parents. Our highest aspiration is to be like them. So Bethany and I started talking about what does it mean to be like them? What does it mean to be? What does it mean to be? And then, amazingly, General Conference came along and Elder Soares did almost an entire talk on what it meant to have a divine marriage. So not to rat anyone out, but I was definitely getting some text messages during General Conference being like, did you see this? Right? This is exactly in line with what we've been thinking. So I wanted to read you a couple quotes by Elder Soares that to me just set the tone for what we're trying to accomplish. So in General Conference, Elder Steurer said, the restored gospel of Jesus Christ proclaims the principle of full partnership between woman and man, both in mortal life and the eternities. In fact, he goes on to say, this is Brother Richard Eyre says, we in the restored church believe that our heavenly parents are equal partners, fully equal, completely equal, magnificently equal, equal to the point of oneness. So we should pause for just a second and say, I'm assuming if you're on this call with us, then you think this book applies to you. We know this book does not apply to everyone, and we're very aware of a specific target audience. I didn't get married till I was 37, and so I understand there's a lot of people in our church who live in our church as a single person. I do think, and of course we have LGBTQ brother and sisters who don't have a marriage that is based on a man and a woman coming together. But I think there's two kind of important points here. One is that we can all learn from heavenly parents, regardless of the relationship we are in, or even if we're not in a relationship, and that this principle of equality applies in work situations, in church situations, in friendships, like this whole idea that we need to look to our heavenly parents as a model. Now, we decided to write a book specifically about marriages because, frankly, we write books for ourselves. And so Bethany has 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters. We wrote All the Girls Who Choose God and The Girl's Guide to Heavenly Mother because we have daughters. So because we are in this marriage, and this is something that we feel is worth our best investment, I sat down and I was evaluating my New Year's resolutions, and I was like, okay, I need more God and, more marriage and family in my life. And to me, the great thing about this book is that takes both of my New Year's resolutions and weaves it into the person I want to be and the places I want to invest. So we were so grateful that in the process of spending this year and a half working on this book and writing on the book, that we got to learn too. So I would like to dive in and give each of the therapists a chance to highlight some of the things that they worked on in this last year and a half in this book. Bethany, do you want to do those introductions?
Sure, absolutely. So just a tiny bit of with these 12 principles, each is a chapter, and it starts off with prophetic counsel, because there is so many rich teachings and doctrine and theology in our faith about the partnership of our heavenly parents and how we can emulate that.
I was doing
and the next section is professional expertise, and that's what the therapist will share with you, sharing their brilliance. And then the third part of every chapter are practices for partnerships, because this is not a book just to read. It's not a book just to think about. This is an actual book to do. Like McArhur said, we want to apply these teachings to enhance and strengthen and enliven our relationships, our marriages. So each therapist wrote about 3 different chapters. And we thought, since Jennifer is hosting today, we'd love for her to start off, and then we'll go in the order therapists appear in the book. And so we'll start with Jennifer to do her 5 minutes. There is so much to share, I know, but therapists, they'll be sharing some of the highlights, some of the parts they feel like are most compelling, some of the things they feel inspired that couples need most of in the 3 different topics they wrote about. So you like therapists. I know that's a big tall order to do in 5 minutes. But Jennifer, could you kick us off?
Sure. And Bethany, it is a thrill to be doing this with you, because I knew I'd found a soulmate when you moved in and you taught a Relief Society lesson on Mother in Heaven. And I thought, I didn't know that God was showing up that day. It was such a thrill, that lesson, and to have you in the ward. So I miss you. But okay. So I was asked to do 3 topics. The first is we celebrate strengths in each partner. The second was we have equal access to family resources. And then third, we create mutual physical nurturance and pleasure. So I'll just say a tiny bit about each of those. We celebrate strengths in each partner. This is really easy to do when we're dating. We're drawn to difference. We're attracted to, if you're an introvert, you tend to be attracted to the extrovert. If you're really kind of routinized and, like predictability, you tend to marry that more spontaneous person. Of course, what is really compelling in the beginning, because, according to Jung, we're drawn to our opposites because we're striving for a kind of completeness. And so what compels us and draws us out of ourselves, I think there's a lot of divine purpose in that, we later come to often resent. Okay, you know, it's attractive when it's helping us solve a problem, but you know, when your spouse is more laid back and you're trying to get to the airport because you like to be there 3 hours before, it can be stressful, right? So oftentimes these differences, we want to handle them by trying to prevail or to say that our particular way is better. So this is a very, you know, natural man thing to do, to either get our way or submit to the other in a resentful way, but to kind of keep a false peace. And instead, I think the notion of our parents in heaven being this collaborative divine couple is that you literally are drawing on the strengths of each person's disposition. It doesn't, what you want is to pull for the best in each other. That means acknowledging where your partner is right or where they have the clearer view, but you don't lose track of your strength either. So it's resisting the urge to either say, you must do it my way or I will submit to your way. It's about staying in that friction, right? Not a contemptuous friction, ideally, but a friction of sorting out what really is best. And that's a valuable process. As I often talk about, that marriages are divine institutions because they drive our development if we'll stay honest and courageous in them and are really trying to make room for two people to thrive. The second one I talked about is equal access to family resources. And a lot of times we have the idea, you know, I said sometimes we obey the golden rule, which is the one who makes the gold makes the rules, right? That's what we have, this perverse idea oftentimes, as opposed to if you're really collaborative, you understand that even if you've arranged your relationship in traditional ways, that men and women are equal contributors to a marriage and should have equal vote on how to utilize those resources. Now, of course, some tend to be savers, and some tend to want to spend, but it goes back to that same idea of how do you work together to be at peace enough, right, with how you're utilizing those both economic resources and time resources. Just another thought about that is a lot of times women, you know, who have grown up with the idea, I grew up with the idea, I was taught the idea that if you're a good woman, you sacrifice. The man's the main show and you're the backup stuff. And that your virtue is kind of measured in how much you're willing to kind of give up your own goals and dreams. I understand that in many marriages, there's a temporary time when that makes good sense. You know, there are seasons, and sometimes if one is trying to get an education, the other is in the more of the backup role with the family or even the economics. The problem is when we make that the model of the marriage. And the happiest marriages, people belong to each other, they make sacrifices for the other, but they also allow themselves, they're able to grow and expand within the context of marriage. By contrast, the least happy marriages, people feel like the marriage constrains them, keeps them from aspects of themselves or their growth. So it's this valuing, again, there's times and seasons, and sometimes I knew in my own marriage, there were times when it was not right for me, that it was right for me to be more in a position of stasis and support, and other times when it was right for me to be more in a position of growing and expanding, and my husband was in the position of supporting. But you want to make sure you're looking for a way for both people to belong to the best of themselves. And then I know I'm going too long. The last thing is that we create, I really like this title, I think Bethany and I came up with this together, but we create mutual physical nurturance and pleasure. And the reason I like that is because it's really keeping the goal, mutual pleasure and mutual physical nurturance. So there's like, sometimes we have the idea that sex is just intercourse on a man's terms, right? A lot of women have learned this idea that the way to be sexual is there to sort of be the outlet for the man, okay? Rather than this mutual pleasure, mutual sustenance. And there's men and women have differences in how they are aroused, differences in desire. There's just lots of differences. But if you have a shared goal of this mutuality, right? Well, then you can step in this together, learn from one another, you know, learn how to create something that is shared and sustaining and a real source of sustenance in a marriage. I'm working on some stuff right now, and very much how this is so, we tend to think of the sexual relationship as the frosting, but I really think it's the cake in marriage. It's so much the foundation is that attraction and mutuality. And if it's not really solid, it really can erode the marriage, even though marriage produces many more things than a sexual relationship. So those are my thoughts so far.
That's so beautiful, Jennifer. I'm learning so much just from listening to you again. So thank you. Again, I know it's a lot to cover, 3 chapters in just a few minutes, but thank you. That was so beautiful. And Julie actually wrote the first chapter in the book. Julie, would you like to dive in next?
Sure. So the first chapter title and first principle is we co-create a mutually empowering vision for our partnership. And in working with Latter-day Saints, sometimes we just inherit this idea of what a marriage should be like, and it's not very conscious, and we don't even talk about it because we just make these assumptions that as partners we're on the same page and we belong to this the same religion, so we must have the same values. So, and then there's also this belief that we're creating something for beyond this life. And this chapter really helps couples focus on what do you want to create in this life? Because if you can't create partnership in this life, you know, that's going to create a problem because we take our relationships with us into the next life. So let's focus on consciously what we want to create as a couple in our marriage. And we've inherited this model of organizing societies, families, and marriages based on a hierarchy, one over the other. And we really, with this book, want to challenge that, as Bethany was saying, that it's about mutuality, it's about partnership rather than one person's needs above the other. And so in this chapter, there's a couple of exercises. One is to clarify your values. And people sometimes misunderstand values as being behaviors. Values are aspirations. And we don't often talk about that because we think, well, we agree on paying tithing as a family, or we agree on saying prayers, but what are the values that are driving what we do? So there's a values list to kind of compare. And then there is a chance to create a vision statement as a couple. What are you trying to create in your relationship? And as Latter-day Saints, so often we have children young or soon after marriage. And so it becomes like this family and the couple gets lost. And so I think the vision statement's really important. The second chapter that I contributed is we honor all contributions as equally valuable. And this is one of my really big passion areas, is talking about paid versus unpaid work. And in our society, in Western society, we value paid work as productive work and unpaid work as reproductive work. And paid work is associated with masculine and men, and unpaid work is associated with women. And male work is more valuable than female work, which means the unpaid work, like we literally do not count unpaid work as productive work in the GDP, for example. Like it literally is not counted. So we have inherited this model that undervalues the unpaid work. And so it's really important to value equally the contribution, whether it's, you know, all partners do unpaid work, but often there's an assumption that women will do the bulk of it, and that's just assumed. And so acknowledging paid and unpaid work is equally valuable, and that that the Savior, he did all unpaid work, right? So it's valuable. It helps us become like him. And then it also talks about the importance of expressing gratitude and honoring each other for the paid and unpaid work. And there's also the concept of visible and invisible work or labor in couples, and to be able to make the invisible visible and valuable is really important. Examples of visible labor are you know, washing the dishes. You can see that. Invisible labor is tracking birthdays for extended family members. So that's like the tracking of it is the invisible, the actually getting the presence is the visible. And so recognizing that. So in the practice, I encourage couples to make a list of unpaid work duties to make that more visible, and 10 types of invisible labor. And remember to include that in gratitude and honoring the contributions of each partner. And then the third is we find joy in the divine pattern of our heavenly parents. And this is the end chapter that kind of brings it all together. And we are created to have joy. And as Jennifer said, often we think, we value sacrifice in our religious framework, and that is good, but we also can seek joy, and that's the purpose of our creation. And our highest joy comes from connection and relationships, including this and particularly the marriage relationship. And then, as we've already talked about, this is the model of Godhood according to our theology. And so the practice for this is finding joy in the small moments. And then planning for the future. How are you going to set goals on each of these 12 areas and be very conscious about how you're going to integrate these into your life. And then the final exercise is to revisit your couple vision statement that you did in the first chapter and see if as you've gone through the book, if something else or other parts you want to include now that you've gone through the entire book. And so those are the chapters, and I'm just so grateful for the chance to work on this book with all of you.
Thank you so much, Julie. I feel the spirit as you were talking, and I feel so grateful as Latter-day Saints. We have this beautiful concept of God being collaborative, partnership, equal oriented. And a real framework of our book is Elder Oak's quote of that our theology begins with heavenly parents, and our highest aspiration is to be like them. And so it's so beautiful that you therapists have given us these insights and tips and practices to become like them, our highest aspirations. So thank you, Julie. McArhur, do you want to introduce our next two therapists? McArhur, are you muted? Can people hear McArhur?
Sorry.
Okay.
I was being a good attendee and I put myself on mute and then forgot. So one of my favorite moments actually in working through this whole book process over the last year and a half is the moment when Geoff came to us and said, you know what? Everything I'm working on this chapter is something that Jody and I, my wife and I, work on together. Can we please do this together? And Bethany and I just kind of looked at each other and said, well, absolutely. And so we love that Geoff and Jody are here today modeling even the things that we're talking about. So Geoff and Jody, can you talk to us about the 3 chapters that you were responsible for and some of the highlights of why you think these are valuable to your clients?
Yeah, thanks. I was so thrilled that you guys let us do it together because this is stuff that we love and talk about all the time. And it's just been a real joy to work on this together. And it really tested our partnership. It's probably the first real project we've ever done with this kind of scope. And so we learned a lot, and we're still married. So it worked out really well. So, all right, let me pull up my notes here. So we had 3 chapters as well, and I'm going to share 2 of them, and Jody's going to share 1 of them. So the chapter I'm going to talk about first is we share spiritual stewardship for our family. And in the church, we're very used to the hierarchy of, prophet, apostles, bishops. We just have presidencies, relief site. There's just all this hierarchy inside the church, and it's fine, and we're comfortable with it, and it seems to run things really well. But in the family, it's a different structure. The family government is co-equals, and there's no hierarchy. And so sharing spiritual stewardship is really about recognizing that from, the model of our heavenly parents, but also even just Adam and Eve and onward on the earth, the family government has always been co-led equally by a husband and a wife. And that's the model for us. And so sometimes it can be challenging to switch from church mode where, we talk about priesthood holders having more influence or authority or permission than women in the church, And in the family, it's just not that way. Husband and wife work equally for the benefit of their children, their families, for each other. And so this whole idea that there's a president and a vice president is simply false. It's based on co-presidents, two people that share equal power, authority, stewardship. Their gifts are combined equally to help really move the family forward spiritually and teach the children and show them that this is how family and family government works, which is really, again, the church is moving to this emphasis on home-centered, church-supported. And so we're thrilled that emphasis is being more explicit and being made more explicit, rather, and that we can model this after our heavenly parents. So that's our first chapter.
So our second chapter is we nurture and provide together, and that comes from the family proclamation. But interestingly enough, a lot of times that's used to just draw a hard line between what roles and responsibilities are supposed to look like in a marriage. But there is an additional line that we used as the focus of our chapter, and just to build on, which was, mothers and fathers are obligated to help each other as equal partners in both nurturing and providing. And Elder Suarez did a fabulous job. I mean, of course. But he also indicated that nurturing and providing are interrelated and overlapping responsibilities, which we have found in our marriage, and I think many couples see that there's some crossover there. Because we bring, like Jennifer said, so many varying strengths to our relationship. And oftentimes, because, like Julie said, we can have a tendency just to fall into traditional ways of being based on what we saw from our own personal experience. We can miss a lot of the crossover. We can miss a lot of the opportunities that we have to fulfill responsibilities in one area because we have something to bring, or to speak up in another area because we have something to offer, but we just tend to stay in those boxes. And in this chapter, we tried to really develop the concept that within that proclamation right there is permission that we can support each other as equal partners in both nurturing and providing, and that all contributions in those areas weigh the same.
Okay, great. And then the third chapter is we prioritize fun and friendship in our partnership. And this one was, of course, a lot of fun to talk about. We based it on the idea that Heavenly Father has this plan of happiness. Our heavenly parents have a plan of happiness. There's a lot of joy built into the gospel, and so prioritizing that as a couple is just it just gives the couple a lot of purpose and a chance to grow together and discover their dreams and their interests, and it just makes life more colorful and interesting. And I think it really allows each person to grow and develop and bring their unique strengths and interests to the marriage with a lot of permission and a lot of playfulness. And it leaves both people feeling more fulfilled. And of course, combining that, just spreads throughout the whole family through generations, I believe. And that's based on this idea that friendship, couples that have a deep friendship and nurture that friendship, this is based on some of John Gottman's research and others, really allows them to have a secure base to explore from, to allow them to be curious about the other person without feeling threatened, that there's a high level of trust and support so that they can really learn and explore and be adventurous and understand and try new things that perhaps they wouldn't on their own. And that can happen, outside of the home. It can happen in the bedroom. It can happen all kinds of places where couples learn how to really integrate fun and play and build that deeper friendship. So those were the three chapters, and we had such a fun time writing and talking about these things, and love sharing it with all of you.
Thank you, Geoff and Jody. So my grandmother actually used to tell us, families that play together stay together. And so my parents actually put a lot of time and emphasis, sometimes not always with cheerful children, to spend a lot of time recreating together. So now Bethany loves to bicycle, and I feel like I'm slightly scarred. Like we had family bike trips all the time, right? And I distinctly remember like just being at angst over the fact that I was 13 years old and I had to wear a bicycle helmet, right? And that was just like,
Yeah.
that was before it was cool, right? And so, but I love that my parents emphasized this so much in our family that it just became very natural. That the playmates, some of my favorite playmates still are my brothers and sisters. And so I love that that was just part of our family life, right?
Beautiful.
The last therapist, best for last is that we're going to say here. I loved getting Ty's chapters when, we're all writing different pieces and we're all coordinating. But when one of Ty's chapters would come in, I'd be like, ooh, I want to hear what he has to say. Because Ty always has such a great idea of weaving together really big ideas and trying to frame them in a way that you can really apply them in your family life. So last but not least, we'd like to hear from Ty and hear his thoughts on his chapters.
Thanks, McArhur. So I had, my 3 chapters were 3, 5, and 9. We'll go through these one at a time. But the first one, chapter 3, is we invest in growth, our own growth, the growth of our partner, and our growth as a couple. When I think of the people that I have worked with or known that are most satisfied in their relationships, there's 2 really key things that are at play. We have a sense of self, ideally, a strong sense of self as we go into relationships. And as we are in relationships, we want to feel like the relationship provides a supportive environment to continue individual growth. And we don't enter relationships just to be individuals, right? We also want to be able to create something that is bigger than the whole, or where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, right? And so to be able to continue to nurture growth as a couple that's bigger than us, that's meaningful, right? Where we need the complementary gifts of our spouse, etc., is important. But what often happens is in relationships, I think, because doing both of those things, as with all good things, there's tensions between competing goods. And sometimes if we're not conscious and intentional, we can gravitate or kind of unwittingly, unconsciously kind of morph into one distortion or another. And one of those distortions is that we can get so lost, we either create kind of a closed system, is what I called it in the chapter, where we live in a culture today where we have this sense of where like all of our needs are supposed to be met by one person. And that can put a lot of pressure on a relationship and put a lot of a pressure on people. On our spouse. And one thing that I've been thinking about a lot lately is that there's sort of a tension in that we all want to feel like we're contributing to the happiness of others, particularly our spouse. But when we become solely responsible for the happiness of another, that ends up it puts a pressure and can start to feel suffocating in relationships. And so when we create these closed systems where we're responsible for meeting all of our spouse's needs and that sort of thing, and we can begin to kind of lose ourself in the relationship, that can begin to feel really heavy. And my wife have felt that early in our marriage, where we both got married a little later. We were both in our early 30s. I was in graduate school, getting ready to become a therapist. My wife had also finished an MBA. Had along, again, kind of her own kind of hopes, dreams, life paths. And as soon as we got married a little later, and we wanted to have a lot of kids. So we thought we better start, getting these suckers out. So our first child she went into labor on our first wedding anniversary. So we did start having kids pretty quickly. And just as quickly, she started to lose her sense of self and felt like she's like, I have these things that I've always wanted. And I just feel empty, as everything that she's doing is for the family and ultimately for these little humans that we were raising. And so at one point in our marriage, we just had to sit down and say, what can we do, right? And to create, we had to negotiate space for her to do other things and to be really intentional about, she wanted to take a stained glass art class. And so I could renegotiate my schedule so I could be there to take care of the kids, so she could go do things that were meaningful to her. And she'd go on girls' trips and things. We need time to build other meaningful relationships outside of the marriage. We still want the marriage to be central, right, and important. And as long as other relationships are complementing that relationship, they can actually support a thriving that doesn't happen when we are relying solely on one person to meet all of our needs. But then the other distortion happens is, especially as people get married for a while, we get lost in roles, we start to withdraw. And mom, depending on what kind of roles, but both mom, dad, husband, wife, might get lost in kids, lost in work, doing other things if they're not conscious and intentional about continuing to nurture the relationship. So being intentional, dating each other, wooing each other can become really, has to take high priority, or we will begin to sort of atrophy as all of these other competing demands in our life come for us, right? So consciousness and intentionality about those two things, continuing to support each other in individual growth, and then continuing to nurture growth together as a couple. We need both of those. And that balance is difficult. Chapter 5, we collaborate on leadership and decision-making. There's two things. There's actually I saw it as a communications model, and I've been using it with couples for the last several years, and it's something that really has provided a valuable framework for couples, because there's two pieces, and you'll see this in the book. But on one axis you have value of self, and on another axis you have value of my spouse. And ultimately what we want is a high value of self, where my needs, my values are important, because if they are, I'm going to assert them into the relationship. And I want to have a high value for the needs, feelings, sensitivities of my spouse. If I have a high value of my needs and a low value for my spouse's, I'm going to be more likely to compete in the relationship to make sure that my needs are met. And that will often happen at the expense of my spouse. But if I have a high need for or high value of my spouse and a low value for self, then we tend to take more of a kind of a pleasing, people-pleasing, accommodating stance in the relationship. And that's when we become more vulnerable to resentment, to passive aggression, right, in relationships. Because in the long term, nobody wants to be in a relationship where we feel like our needs are not equally considered in that relationship. So ultimately, if we're going to have a truly collaborative stance, I need to have a high value for my needs and a high value for my spouse's needs. And then we're going to stay in the game, right? We're going to, until we get a win-win. So, well, that's if there's conflicts, but ultimately, how do we come together, negotiate, talk about things? One of the things that I mentioned there is that collaborative decision-making has to start with values before skills, right? If I don't genuinely value my spouse's gifts, strengths, contributions, all that they bring, then there's no way to really hold that collaborative space in the relationship. It will leak. If we focus on skills before values, we just become more skilled manipulators, ultimately. So that values piece is really critical, right? It has to be honest. So it's a question we have to often just continue to ask ourselves throughout life and the relationship. Do I really, or even in different topic areas, do I really value my spouse's input, gifts, contributions when it comes to how we talk about finances, how we talk about kids, how we talk about travel, how we talk about play and recreation, all those things. And then finally, chapter 9, we address problems and conflict respectfully. And so one of the things that I wanted to take up here is that it's easy to see conflict as a problem. And one of the surest things, there are a few guarantees in marriage, but one of them is that we're marrying somebody who is not us, right? Whose hopes, dreams, humanness, right? The strengths and the weaknesses, all that they bring is going to be, they're a different person. And that's going to be the beauty of marriage. And that's also going to be one of the things that makes marriage difficult, right? That introduces conflicts. But conflict, sometimes, again, we have this tendency to think of conflict as a problem. But conflict is simply difference, right? If I really want sushi on our date night and my wife really wants Mexican, or for our family trip, I really want to go to Hawaii and my wife really wants to go to Disney World, we have some conflicts. right? So how do we come together and address those differences in a way that we're kind of back to this valuing, self-valuing, spouse? When we truly value, we work through conflicts, and conflict resolution, if we do it well, if we have good conflict resolution skills, and we highly value ourselves and each other, working through conflicts can actually be a way of, it matures the relationship, but it can also foster a deeper sense of intimacy. When I feel seen, when in my differences, I feel seen, I feel valued by my wife, I feel closer to her, and I want to be closer to her, and she with me. And so as we address things, there's a mantra in family studies. It's easy to kind of see people as problems, right, when there's a conflict. And one of the mantras of family studies, which is where my training was, is that the person is not the problem is the problem. And so if we can see the problem as something outside of us, rather than, if my wife has a disagreement, I just see her, right, as the problem, then we're likely to be in a combative stance. But if we can externalize that and see the problem is the problem, then we can come together side by side and address issues, concerns, conflicts as co-equals and as partners and allies, right? We're friends in this process. We're not enemies. Sorry for the congestion. And then ultimately, we can much more easily get to a solution when we're friends in the process. And so that became, I think that was one of the other main things. Let me just check my notes here to make sure I got everything. Those are the main things. So that's those are my 3 sections. Thank you.
Ty, thank you so much. I was actually sitting here thinking, like, I should be taking notes here. I'm learning even from this phone call. And so I appreciate that even after a year and a half, I'm still sitting here gaining value. So thank you so much for your thoughts. We put out a call for questions, and we received a slew of different people who had some very specific questions that they wanted to workshop through. So we have about 15 minutes. We're going to pull out a question, one for each therapist, and so that they have a chance to respond to your specific needs. So Bethany will kick that off with a question that you guys submitted.
Sure. And before we dive into the questions, I just want to thank all of the therapists for sharing such valuable insights with us. And it's a lot to cover, 12 principles. But we hope that those who are listening in can see how by learning about these principles, they will help build your partnership muscles so that we can all live more fully in the image of our heavenly parents. So here's the first question that someone submitted. And this is for Julie. This person wrote, "My relationship is not a partnership. I'm an accidental traditionalist. We somehow settled into old paradigms of thinking when it comes to our relationship, and I want to burn it all down, but that feels dramatic and destructive. Can this change be one-sided? Can I change without his consent and participation? How long is it sustainable to have a partner that isn't into partnership in actual practice? He thinks he's into equality, but that's not evident in our relationship." I know that's a tough question, Julie, but you're so bright. We're excited to see how you tackle this. Can one person take this model and improve their marriage?
Well, I want to ask more questions to this questioner, like, have you had a conversation with your partner about what's not working for you? And because if you love each other and if he loves you, he's going to want you to be satisfied with the relationship. So if he's not open to a conversation, that's a whole different issue. The issue is not, sharing the workload. It's that he's not valuing what you value, or he's not making room for what you value. So, okay, so can you change? It takes 2 to create a partnership. Yes, you can make some adjustments and stop doing certain things in terms of like dividing up, household duties or things like that. But you both have to be on board if you want a meaningful partnership. So the first step would be talk about it and say what's not working for you and ask for what you would like. And then if your partner is not open to that, again, it's a bigger issue, and I would go talk to a professional about it, because it's more than just an equality issue.
Thank you, Julie. I know, and these are big questions that could have long conversations, but thank you for giving us for that answer. The next question is for Jennifer. This question comes from Louisiana. How does a couple supporting each other's passions and dreams? We all have limited resources, both financial, time, and energy, and often feels like one partner's trying to get more investment. And of course, some partners' passions help financially support the family and some don't. So how do we solve it? And since Jennifer wrote the chapter on access to family, I'd love to hear your response.
Let me just see if I can open it up. Okay. I think it's muted. Oh. Christy, are you on that? I don't know if I can. Okay. The question. So first of all, I think it's not easy, and I think just that while we're striving for ideals, we're often trying to do that within. We are all trying to do that within finite resources, finite time, different challenges with our kids, a spouse who doesn't have the flexibility with work that we might want or whatever. So it's not easy. I think the primary thing, though, is to start with a goal of two people thriving, right? Starting with the goal of how are we going to do this, knowing that there may be times and seasons. I sometimes have talked on podcasts about there was a period where John was working and even traveling, and I was home with a special needs child and a newborn baby, and it was hard. And the thing that helped me a lot during that period was to remind myself, or to go through it again, that this, as hard as it was my choice out of all of my difficult choices, right? Like I could either have someone else care for my special needs child and work, or I could be the one, and I knew that I wanted to be the one, but it was also not easy because I was doing the heaviest lifting in the couple during that time, and necessarily there wasn't really another way to do it for us at that point. So, but I also knew that we valued as a couple that there would be that later on, once our kids were a little more established, I would be able to pursue things that mattered to me. And so it was sharing that goal, trusting that my partner valued that with me. And that allowed for some of the, like, how do we do this? Even if it means there's at times some where one is giving more than the other, but you trust each other to make this a reality as best you can in an imperfect world, right? And knowing that sequentialness is a part of that too, that there may be times and seasons where you each do different tasks.
I'm going to ask the next question, but I wanted to also talk in there. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she said she had raised 3 children, and she said, my brain needed to focus on one thing at a time. So she says, I was really good at being a mom for, the 20 years, raising my children and having them now be in college. And she said, I'm still a mom, but the full-time temporal needs are not on my doorstep every day. She said, so now I'm going to go back to school. And she's in graduate school, going to divinity school, actually. And she just said, like, I know my brain enough to know that I had to do one thing at a time. And I thought about it, and I thought, that is not my brain. My brain would lose it if I had to do one thing at a time.
Yeah.
Right? Like, my brain, much to my co-author's delight, needs to work on many different things at the same time. Like, that is what makes my brain function well. And so I think, like, also understanding, like, there's a lot of different ways you can set it up, right? As long as, like Jennifer said, you have the goal, right?
Yeah. And I'll just quickly say one more thing, that there's self-respect in your choice. Like sometimes we do the long suffering thing out of a kind of self-disrespect, or a way to kind of have a covert superiority. Both of those are immature. Like even, how to say it, that you are deliberately choosing, even if it's the harder thing at the time, rather than doing it in a kind of resentment or martyr frame. That's really toxic to one's sense of self or a marriage.
That's great. Honor your own choice, right?
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think if we all adapt this pattern of living in the image of our heavenly parents, we will live in a way that is growth oriented, is with respect and momentum and progress, and not resentment or martyrdom. But
Right.
thank you, Jennifer. That was beautiful. And McArthur's going to ask our next couple questions.
Yeah, and this is one I really resonated with. So if the person who submitted is on the call, I wanted to thank them. So here's a question for Geoff and Jody. We are 12 years into a mixed faith marriage. As I read through the book chapter titles, such as Establishing a Shared Vision, Sharing and Spiritual Stewardship in the Family, and Finding Joy in the Divine Pattern of Our Heavenly Parents, I cannot help but feel a sense of loss. How do we do this in a mixed faith marriage? They had some other details there, but their last question actually just broke my heart a little bit. It said, how can I be full at peace, feeling chronically lonely in my spiritual life? And so because Geoff and Jody were working on the chapters of spiritual stewardship, I wanted them to take this on.
Thanks, MacArthur. So we just want to acknowledge, first of all, that that when you have a situation that is less than the ideal, which we spend a lot of time thinking about and striving toward, then the loss is very real. And so just to recognize that in a lot of situations where things don't really pan out the way you hoped, or kind of like Jennifer just discussed, how sometimes you just have to choose the harder of all the hard options, and primarily it's all less than ideal. There just will be loss, and that's a part of the learning and growing. And much of the time that that has a chance to settle and even evolve, and sometimes not, but we also improve in our ability to be able to handle it. So that was an initial point. Do you want to?
Yeah, and I think that too with mixed faith partnerships. I think there's this belief that, like, if we all agree on the same things, we won't be lonely. But I've worked with lots of couples who believe the exact same things and feel terribly lonely. I think that loneliness is really a product of lack of intimacy, lack of curiosity, lack of connection, lack of respect, lack of interest in the other person's world. And so, as difficult as it is, as we have identified, you don't have to feel lonely spiritually. You've just opened up an opportunity here for endless conversations and exploring and intimacy and interest in each other's worlds. And I think your children can benefit from it. I think that to sort of become the martyr that, like, and I'm not being accusatory with that word. I'm just saying that there's a temptation there sometimes to feel like one person wins and the other person loses in this. And so getting out of that and recognizing that you can still have a beautiful divine partnership working together for the benefit of blessing your children spiritually, and it will look and feel very different than perhaps what you were raised with or what you maybe even both agreed on initially. But it will, but loneliness doesn't have to be the result of that. Loneliness is a very deliberate choice. Beating the loneliness is a very deliberate choice together to open up about your pain and your struggle and your fears and your worries and your worst case scenarios in your head, and share those and be open and real with each other. And you'll be surprised at the intimacy you can discover in all of that.
Thank you so much for that. I think one thing that occurs to me with all of these answers is that it's almost like we have an ongoing opportunity to declare ourselves a silo, or an ongoing opportunity to turn to our partner, right? And so in fact, my husband used to keep a little note next to his bedside, because he is fiercely independent, as am I. And so we had a little note that said next to our bedside, "No man is an island." And when each of us had this moment where we could feel ourselves choosing the island, right? We were like, woo woo, come back from the island, come back from the island, right? Like join me again, right? But sometimes it's hard to train yourselves, especially if you've experienced difficulty in this, trauma in this, challenges, and most of us have to some degree or another, right? To choose again to turn to each other is, in every scenario we've been talking about, in every answer, there's a choice there to turn to each other. And I think that commitment is real and big and not always possible, right? So let me ask this question.
Hey, can I just make one more comment too? I love the note on the side of the bed. I just wanted to do a shout out to Ben Crowder, who did the art for this guidebook, where
Yes.
he created these images that just show and celebrate union and togetherness and partnership and collaboration. And his artwork is so stunning. It's subtle, but it really makes you think and contemplate about these principles of partnership. And so I hope the artwork, the very simple, lovely, sublime artwork from this guidebook will inspire you. Put it next to your bed. And remember, partnership is our ideal. Partnership is our goal. Our heavenly parents and becoming like them is our aim.
Right. A recommitment, a constant recommitment. In fact, so we should, before I ask this last question to Ty, we might have time for a few more. We'll see how much we can sneak by the hour. But Ben Crowder is doing an art show if you live in Utah or Provo. His art from the book will be on display for the month of February at Written Vision in downtown Provo. It starts to hang the first Friday in February. So for Valentine's Day, it's a great idea to go look at some partnership art. And he's also going to be selling small prints of the art if that's of interest to you as well. So we had one question that we had directed to Ty, and then we actually had a couple of questions that people directed to Bethany and I. So let's see what people feel like as we hit the time here. So Ty, this is for you. A piece of advice I've often heard from many credible sources, therapists, authors, etc., is to create clear agreements in your relationship and not to hold expectations for things that haven't been clearly agreed to. What advice do you have for a couple when agreements seem to be lost in the shuffle? A tough conversation is held, an agreement is reached, but both parties commit to the plan. But then when the situation occurs again, one partner says, I never agreed to that. I don't remember that. Is the answer to make contracts? It feels like it would send the marriage back into the realm of contractual marriage rather than forward to divine marriage. Is this a situation that might be held by reading and applying elements of this book? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, to answer the last question first, I would say absolutely, right? Given that it would be helpful, right? The principles that each of us, all four of us, have spoken to, five of us, and I think I'm going to try to answer that because that's another one of those questions, as Julie had said, that I think I would want a little bit more information. But certainly, we don't want to just move into a tit for tat contractual relationship. There's what I call the great trifecta of relationships, is that we need to know our yes, our why, and how. Right. The yes is kind of what Julie spoke to earlier. The vision. What are we moving toward? Right. And we need to have a clear vision of what we're creating together. So that we can move towards something. Otherwise, we become problem focused, distress focused, and you can't create meaningful solutions by just focusing on problems. And so as we're focused on our yes, what we're creating together, and sometimes even integrating structures in the relationship, like I typically recommend a weekly or bi-weekly like couple counsel is what I call it, but you can call it whatever you want. But coming together to say, these are some things we're working on in our relationship. And every week we come and we talk about those. But doing it a yes-oriented way, right? How are you feeling in the relationship? Are you feeling connected? What can I do to support you this week in feeling more connected, right? Or how can I support you with self-care? You can identify, 3, 4, 5 things. You have to keep it manageable. But there's sort of this yes. And then the rest is, and then we need to have healthy motivations, our why, if we have our internally intrinsic motivations, we're doing it because it's something that we feel is genuinely good and that we're striving for. Once we have that, then the rest is how. And the how is where people either get stuck because they don't have the resources, or we confuse means and ends. And we focus on we kind of make means the ends, if that makes sense. So you kind of get lost in the doing, and then we lose the vision in it. And so to stay out of that contractual stance, we want to make sure we're staying connected to our yes, and then having regular conversations. And if there are things that are getting lost or miscommunicated, one thing that often happens as I work with couples who are discussing needs or boundaries or that sort of thing, is sometimes we use a certain word and we have an understanding of what that means. And our spouse is going to use the same word and they have a different understanding of what that means. And if we haven't really clarified what we mean when we say that thing, then there can be things can get lost in translation, and if I didn't fulfill an agreement, is it because was the agreement clarified, or was there something nebulous about it? So having discussions where those things are, there's a context where, violated expectations, right? Or unheld agreements can be discussed, and then to be able to sort of reassess, recalibrate, and then focus, but with the try again, but with the end in mind. Are we clearly moving towards some aspect of our shared vision, our shared yes for our marriage, or are we getting lost in some of the weeds that are ultimately not going to be helpful, right, in terms of what we're trying to co-create together?
That's so beautiful, Ty. Thank you so much for these gems of wisdom. And I'm so grateful that we have prophetic revelation and we have professional expertise. We are so fortunate to draw on both as we're trying to enliven and expand and elevate our marriages. I know we're out of time, but can we just wrap up with one last question? Can I ask one to McArhur? Is that okay? This was a question they got that really, I think, goes to kind of the why of the book, or kind of the model that we've tried to create in this book. And our reader asked, the concept in this book should sound like solid advice, but how can you say it is an example of heavenly parents when we have no example of a heavenly mother teaching her children, being part of creation, making decisions, or sharing leadership? How can we call this a divine marriage? So McArhur, do you want to respond to that, kind of the why and the how of this book, and then wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. So from our standpoint, the reason that we were able to do this book is because when Bethany and I started researching Heavenly Mother in particular, and then Heavenly Parents, we were amazed at how much information we found. So we continually have this idea, we don't know much, we don't know much, we don't know much, and we cannot spin on that idea. But what's fascinating is when we actually got into it, we found that we have a lot more information about the very things that you're bringing up. So for instance, some of the information that we have that was declared in General Conference to be our doctrine says that our heavenly parents designed the plan of salvation together. Elder Ballard has said this. It's also part of the Gospel Topics essay on Mother in Heaven. So to me, that immediately talks about the whole plan, the whole big picture, our entire earth life, why we're here, the process to get us back to our heavenly parents was worked on together. So ultimately, like, we don't know how the details worked. We don't know who does which role. We don't know Heavenly Mother's strengths compared to Heavenly Father's strengths. Every couple has slightly different talent, not even slightly, very different talents. But what we do know is the co-creation that Ty was just talking about. We know that the plan for our lives was co-created by them. Other prophetic counsel have talked about how Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother work together for the salvation of their children, that we are their work and their glory. And that's an incredible concept together. It's literally the point of us being on this earth life together. The Gospel Topics essay talks about how they're side by side. In fact, it talks about that they could not have been exalted one without the other. So from my standpoint, we have this idea that there's not enough here, but in reality, we have, and I just picked a handful that were meaningful from the Gospel Topics essay. In our book, we have pages and pages of prophetic and doctrinal foundation for the book. There is plenty of information to say this is how our heavenly parents function together. And I appreciate that we don't have a lot of details about what that looked like, because every marriage has to set up according to what their strengths and talents and their their collaborative complement to each other can be. And I think that that's actually the power here, is that we have the vision. We talk about that if people don't have a vision, they are lost, right? And so for marriages to have the vision of what we're to be like, then when we look around and all the examples in the world and all the options you have about what it can look like, to know that when we look to heaven for our model, that's where we're going. That's our highest aspiration. So we hope that today's introduction with these therapists has been useful. I've been taking mental notes of like, oh, I got to remember that. Oh, I got to talk to my husband about that one. And so it's been really, really satisfying even to spend time together today. And we hope that today and the book have been super useful. And at the end of it, if we care about God and marriages and relationships, that this is worth our best effort. And that's something that we had to remind ourselves every single time we got on the phone to work, right? Like, this is worth our best effort. So that's what we hope you guys take home today. Thanks for joining us.